Chapter 9. Ross Montgomery flicked the remote, sat back to look at the news alone, on his 36-inch flat screen, in his small apartment with high rent, when a detective called asking him to identify the body of his twin brother Robert. He didn't cry or show any emotion. He finished eating his sandwich, took a swallow of his Heineken beer he ordered earlier from the deli a few blocks from his apartment. He knew that day would come, but he didn't know it would come this soon. Barely in his 30s, Robert lived a rich man's life with beautiful European models and stunning talented Asian beauties who were proficient in the art of sexual bondage. Ross wasn't as ambitious as Robert, although he could be, but he wanted the life of an actor. He lived for acting. When he couldn't get stage work and television because soap operas had gone the way of the dinosaurs, his work was limited as well as his paycheck. So Ross supplemented his pay with odd jobs. One role he played was as a sexual stand-in for his brother Robert, where the woman would practice their techniques on him. But when that paycheck slowed, he worked as a magician at children's parties, or took his talents as a magician to theme parties for the rich and famous. Robert vouched for him as his brother, and he eventually made a name for himself, and didn't depend on Robert to supplement his income. Even though he made a nice piece of change, which afforded him a decent living in Manhattan in an expensive building, his first love was acting. He lived for acting. When he didn't have work, he walked around with stories in his head and movies in his mind. He was gray in 50 Shades of Grey, and when Robert asked him to participate in his sexual games, and when he needed a threesome, he called Ross, and Ross was more than excited to take on that role. When Robert didn't want to participate in games for his clients, where old men wanted to watch their young wives being fucked by young virile men, Robert called on Ross for favors. And because he always needed money, Ross became a willing participant. However, when Robert met Alex because of Jonas, he became consumed with Alex Blackstone. Robert no longer became interested in other women, and turned the women over to Ross. Some of the things were too kinky for Ross's taste, but he went along just the same, until he developed a taste for it. It was just acting after all. That's how Ross rationalized his actions. Ross wasn't a magician, a clown, or a sexual provocateur. He was an actor. At least, that's what he wanted to believe about himself. He dressed the part in manner and talk. He pretended he was as rich as his brother, but he wasn't even close until he got that phone call telling him his brother was dead, and that he had inherited all his property and his money. Then he began assuming his brother's identity. But he kept his day job. He enjoyed the role of actor-magician he had become. He even enrolled in a school that taught hypnotism. And he incorporated that into his act. After all, he was Ross, an actor, and his brother the oversexed handsome man who couldn't get enough of the lifestyle of bondage and S&M, which he had come to embrace and enjoy, was now dead. The day before Robert died, Robert needed to see Alex. He postponed his date with the young Eurasian woman and scheduled Ross to take his place at a well-known bondage club owned by Jonas Blackstone. The night Robert called Ross to impersonate him, he said, "There is this woman I want, and I intend to get her no matter what I have to do. She's the wife of Maximilian Blackstone. How can you expect a woman to leave her husband for you?" Ross had asked Robert. "Because I will blackmail her, and then I will inform her of Blackstone's addiction to sexual asphyxiation." "You have the same addiction," Ross said. "But she doesn't know this." "How long can you keep that a secret?" Ross queried. "For as long as it takes. She's coming around, and I don't want anything to interfere. Meet Miranda at the club, and do this one thing for me. I'll pay you more money than you have ever seen. You won't have to go on those crappy jobs pretending you're an actor." "But I am an actor, and I enjoy my gigs. It's one thing I can differentiate myself from you. You have been trying to do that forever, but you always come back to me, and you follow into my footsteps. And look at you. You dress like me, and now you're beginning to enjoy fucking all those beautiful women. Just like me. You are so good at what you do, none of the women can tell you're not me. But there is only one person I want," Robert confided. Ross listened attentively. No. I need Alex Blackstone," Robert said to Ross. Okay. I'll do it. I like Miranda, that's the only way I would do this. She has this great body, and anal sex with her is terrific. The only thing I don't like about her is the sexual asphyxiation. Make sure you tell her how you feel. But let me warn you, if she insists, don't leave her unattended," Robert said. It was that night Ross would meet Miranda in Jonas's club. It was that night when he should have been watching Miranda, he was busy on his phone. When he looked up, she was blue, and she died moments later. He tried covering up the accident by hanging her as if she had committed suicide. The whole ordeal had been unsettling to Ross, and he slipped back into his delusional role as an actor. He never heard any more about Miranda. Ross stopped reading the newspapers and thought Jonas Blackstone would take the fall for his stupid deed. He didn't say anything to Robert. What could he say? So he kept quiet and retreated into his own world until he was asked to become the night's entertainment at a rich couple's mansion. Eager to put everything behind him and socialize and enjoy the money he had inherited, as well as the large apartment Robert owned, Ross agreed to take the engagement. After all, he could meet some of the rich and famous. Maybe find him a girlfriend. His now status and money gave him the idea that he could find a better class of women. Not the ones he would pick up here and there on a movie set. These women were as keen as he was to meet someone that could move their career from an extra to a speaking role in Hollywood. Not even money could buy him the parts he wanted or the women he sought. When he spotted Alex at the Halloween party and realized that she was the woman Robert had obsessed over, his attraction was automatic. Knowing his brother, he wouldn't be attracted to a woman unless she had knowledge of the things he enjoyed, and it all had to be sexual in nature. The second he saw Alex in that tight black cat outfit and the knee-high boots with a whip at her side, his groin ached. He wanted to be with her and in her. He didn't know Alex straight away, especially with her wearing a mask. But as Melody passed Ross, she whispered, "Alex Blackstone." Not because she wanted to out Alex, but she saw that these two ships in the night were attracted to each other, and she would bring them into port, and the rest were up to them. Melody wanted Alex to have someone to talk to, and not stand around like the pretty girl at the prom who everyone is afraid to speak to because she might ignore them. As Ross gave Alex a wanted gaze, he remembered the Blackstone name. She was the one who had captured his brother's attention and heart. A brother who nothing and no one could hold for very long. But this woman had managed to do that, and Ross had to know why. What is it about her, he thought. She was exceptionally pretty, but Robert was used to beautiful women. It had to be more, and he needed to find out. Now was the time to practice his hypnotism skills, plant a suggestion in her mind. When he whispered into her ear, he hypnotized her. She was no longer Alex Blackstone. He didn't know how long it would take and how long she would be under, and frankly he didn't care. She would now be his to do as he commanded. In the middle of his act, when Alex left the stage, Ross brought his act to a sudden end and walked down from the stage and took Alex's hand. She smiled at him and said, "That was wonderful." That is what he had programmed her to say and think. "Can we go home now?" "I'm feeling a little tired," Ross said to Alex. "Yes, of course, dear," Alex said in her light, small voice he programmed. She followed along like a robot as he took her by the hand and walked through a crowd of raucous, drunken people, trying to have a conversation with him. He hurried Alex outside with no signs of Melody to stop him and entered into his limo, which took him to Robert's apartment. Alex was still under hypnosis when she followed him into the elevator and into the luxurious apartment. "Did we just move in this place?" "I don't remember it," she said, standing in one spot, unable to go any further. She didn't know which direction was the bathroom, bedroom, or kitchen. Her eyes scanned the room full of impeccable decorated modern furniture of glass and chrome, and a large white L-shaped sofa the length of the wall was the focus of the room. And on the walls, paintings of old and modern masters. The floors were of dark hardwood and Italian marble, bright glistening chandeliers from the foyer leading down a long hallway. Ross didn't turn a light on. The lights from the skyline provided all the illumination he wanted. "Yes, we just moved in. I hope you love it. Your clothing will come soon. But I would rather you buy new things. I called a specialty dress shop with high-end clothing and had them drop something off tomorrow. You can choose what you want to keep." Alex smiled. What young woman doesn't like new clothes? Ross thought he had covered everything at the last minute. He would get on the phone after Alex fell asleep and ask one of his friends who owns a dress shop to make a Sunday delivery. Ross looked at Alex and said, "I'm feeling unusually passionate tonight." He braced up against her. She glanced into his eyes. He took off her mask and he took off his mask. So far so good, he thought. This could work for him after all. But he didn't know how long he could keep this up. His desire for her heightened when she turned her back to him and said, "Undress me." "No, I want you to keep on your costume. I want you to do to me what you've been doing before." All Alex could recall was her role as being a dominant. That's all Ross wanted her to remember. She glanced around, "But where are our toys and the instruments?" "And there's no playroom," she said, a little disappointed. "We don't need one now. We can improvise." Ross liked that word. As an actor, he was good at improvisation. "Then take off your clothes," she said, her voice low and sexy. He stood and undressed, his nature rising with every thought of being with this woman, even if he had to endure the lashes of her whip. "Now stand and face that door. Put your hands on it and lean forward." Ross did, and then he felt the light pain of a whip after he heard the snap and crack of leather. He didn't cringe. He didn't move. He fell into this as if it was second nature to him. And he became more aroused than ever. He looked down at his hard cock. When she cracked the tip of her whip on his buttocks, ever so light, but extremely quick, he had an orgasm, and he didn't feel the pain, but it was there. It revealed itself differently, through pleasure. "You're not playing fair, Ross." The name didn't sound familiar, but Alex didn't question that. Her mind only centered on Ross. She appeared to enjoy what she had done to him. She wore a seductive smirk. Alex moved close to Ross and whispered in his ear, "I like it when I can get in more than 2 lashes before you come all over yourself." Ross turned more embarrassed about the premature ejaculation. "I'll only be a few minutes. Get comfortable." When Ross entered the bedroom, Alex was sprawled naked on the bed. She was smiling up at him. "Turn over on your stomach. I want to penetrate you from behind," Ross said, looking at her. His eyes hungry. "You know I don't want that this early in our games, Max." She blinked and gazed at Ross leaning over her. "Why did I call you Max?" Alex looked up at Ross. He knew. Maybe it was bringing her to something familiar that was disturbing his suggestions. He had to do something quick. He leaned over her, placed his hands between her legs, and rubbed her clit with the pad of his finger as he whispered into her ear. "Relax, Catherine." He knew that he couldn't call her Alex. That would trigger an unneeded response. But then he couldn't keep feeding her suggestions. He had to find a way for her to lose her identity completely. But that would take time. "Soon we're going to be married, Catherine, and I'm taking you to Italy. Haven't you wanted to go to Italy?" "Yes," she said, her word sounding as if she was in a daze. "I'm going to let you go to sleep after I have satisfied you, and tomorrow we can plan our trip," Ross said. That was his plan. To take her someplace for a long time. Get her out of the familiar. Make love to her the way he desired, and then he could be the man she would admire and want, and she would belong to him. He would accomplish something his brother wasn't able to do. Make this beautiful, desirable, talented woman his. Take her from Blackstone. In that way, he had achieved what Robert wasn't able to do, and he had money. Robert's money, but it's his now. And there's no one around to point out his failures. "I just need time, and soon she will forget everyone and everything that keeps her tethered to Maximilian Blackstone," he thought, looking down at her, before he fell between her legs and satisfied her and him. Chapter 10. Sabastian Hunter had worked as a detective first class on homicide when he woke up alongside a dead female body. She had been the wife of a prominent rich businessman who spent all his days traveling and working overseas. The businessman thought if he could surround his young wife with toys and give her money, that was all she needed, but obviously it wasn't enough and she needed more. She needed a hot, willing young stud who stayed hard. And that was Sabastian Hunter, detective first class. Although the businessman's young wife died of natural causes, the coroner said the excitement was too much for her heart. Even as a 28-year-old, she couldn't engage in the rigors of sexual gymnastics Sabastian had put her through. Not even a woman with a sound heart could have withstood the hungry appetite of this young detective. Sabastian fucked early in the morning before going off to work, during lunch breaks, and 3 or 4 times after work, and sometimes during his investigations, and all with the rich businessman's wife. She had a bad heart that no one noticed until it was too late. She died on top of Sabastian Hunter, the lead detective in homicide. When he called his partner, the partner said, "You have to cover this shit up. I'll give you an alibi." But Sabastian said no, and the next day the papers had every dirty detail. He lost his job after 10 years working his way up from patrolman at the age of 20, going to college at night or weekends. Now he's taking cases about married men trying to find a reason to divorce their wives and marry the maids or their children's nannies. Or rich older women trying to get the dirt on their husbands in order to be available to fuck their young boyfriends. Before and after Maximilian entered his office, he had known about Blackstone. It was in Blackstone's apartment building that he first saw Max. He remembered that he had found Robert Montgomery hanging from a light fixture in one of Blackstone's expensive apartments in Blackstone's building, where he kept his family and dog. Conveniently, Sabastian thought when he checked the video cameras and discovered they were inoperative on the night of the death. He never did find out if the case had been solved, or whether it was a homicide. He had no doubt it was homicide, but they threw him out and fired him the next day. The death of Robert Montgomery became a salacious story buried in the back of the local newspapers, and Sabastian didn't doubt it was because of the rich industrialist Maximilian Blackstone. Sabastian put on his suit coat and walked to his fiancée and said, "If Mr. Blackstone calls, tell him I'll have something for him in a few hours." He patted her on the butt and walked out. She turned, looked, and smiled, then walked to her desk to work on the computer. He had been with her after he lost his job on the force, and now he had plans to marry her. Maybe now he could, with the money he would make from this case. He hailed a cab and gave the cabbie the address of Alex's friend. It was in the village. He watched at his phone, and the girl in his precinct, whom he had a brief affair with, had located Melody and sent information on all the influential people Alex could have talked to. With a list in hand, he would start with the closest to his office. The first was Alex's girlfriend Melody. Max had given him her name, but not her location. Max said Melody was the only person with a personal connection she knew in New York. She met Melody when she took a college course. He would stop at her apartment in the village first. The building wasn't what he expected. The facade of the apartment appeared to be new as it sat surrounded by two run-down apartments, making a sandwich of Melody's place. He didn't know what to expect from rich, spoiled girls. Getting out of the cab, he paid and stepped on the curb. She had a doorman, and he would announce him. So much for a surprise. Surprised by her response, Melody said for him to come up. After all, he was a stranger and a detective. He expected her to say, "Fuck off." Sabastian walked into the elevator, and it stopped on her floor and the elevator opened. He spotted a door across from the elevator, and two doors to the right, partly opened. Melody stepped out into the hall and met him. She was dressed in a black Chinese kimono and appeared to be fidgeting with the sash on the robe. Then she glanced at Sabastian and dropped her hands and gestured for him to enter the room. When she dropped her hands, the robe opened and she was nude. When his eyes fell to her pubic area, she hurriedly tied the sash, gave out a sexy smile and said, "Come in." Melody, a young woman of 24 or 25, acted as if it was nothing to walk around and show her nude body to a stranger. He enjoyed the sight, and if that's how she wanted to greet a stranger, far be it for him to complain. "Sit down, Sabastian." "What an interesting name." "You can call me Sam," he said. "Very well," she said, and sat near him on a small sofa. The apartment was small, as were all of the apartments in this area of Manhattan. He glanced around. Each item was well thought of and was more expensive than the rent. It was extremely clean, and the furniture all antiques. Melody saw him examine everything with his eyes. "The maid came today." "Good thing, or you would know all my secrets," she said, giving Sabastian a sexy smile. "You don't miss much, do you, Sam?" "My mother furnished my apartment." "Not much. But I didn't come here to admire your mother's antiques or your young body. I need to ask you about Alexander Blackstone." "Alex? Did she get home okay?" "She left everything at my parents' home and took off. I have her clothes and purse in here, if you want to take it with you. The last time I saw her, she was talking to that magician at my parents' Halloween party." "Do you know his name?" "I didn't hire him. I think he was recommended by Robert Montgomery, a casual friend of my mother and father." Sabastian wasn't surprised to hear Robert's name. Robert had a way of inserting himself into New York society. He knew all kinds of people, from the high to the low, and that's how he made his contacts, and that's how he became well known. Do you know the magician's name? All I know is Ross somebody. Melody cast her eyes on Sabastian, and as he listened he watched at her crossed shapely legs. I can get you his name. She stood up in front of him, her kimono opened wide, this time showing her extended nipples, and revealing she had recently gotten a Brazilian wax. He was terrific. My mother's friends want to book him at more parties. But their contact is no longer alive. She turned and sashayed to her bedroom, and when she returned, she was stark naked except for a pair of black 6-inch high heels, which did make her look taller, and a bag containing Alex's clothes. She dropped the bag in a chair and stood over Sabastian. No one knows his last name. But I have his number here. She waved the paper in front of his face before sitting down next to him. He couldn't hide the large noticeable bulge in his pants, and neither could Melody hide her excitement. Sabastian reached over to take the paper from her, but she said to him, "What do I get for this?" And she opened her legs. He went to the floor on his knees on a soft beige rug in front of her, and his head fell between her legs. Her head fell back, her mouth opened in surprise, and her nipples peaked from the warmth of the arousal. His hands reached up for the paper and then her breasts. He tucked the paper in his pocket, and with his finger circled around her nipples in the same motion as his tongue on her clit. An hour later, Melody walked into the shower at the same time Sabastian ambled out of Melody's apartment building and hailed a cab. He had a phone number, a soft dick, and nothing else. In his excitement, he forgot Alex's things. He didn't need much more because he was a detective, and with a few clues he could find this Ross fellow. Calling on his phone before he went back to his office, he would try to get Ross's last name from the girl at his precinct. "Cindy, I need the name of a magician. All I have is his first name. I need the last name like yesterday." "I'll try, but that will cost you." "If you get me his name, I will afford to pay whatever you want." Sabastian knew it wasn't money that Cindy wanted. She just wanted some time with him. Maybe stay overnight, fuck her, and watch a few movies with her. That was the least he could do, if she got him what he needed. But he would have to tell his fiancée something, and lately this job had given him the perfect cover. He wished he could settle down, but there were so many women, and so little time to make his way through them. Before he arrived at the office, Cindy sent the information on his phone. He glanced at his good girl. She deserve a whole week. He read the information, and then it hit him. She even sent a picture. What did he do with that newspaper? Sabastian jumped out of the cab running after paying his fare, and bound 2 stairs at a time. When he reached the 3rd floor he was out of breath and sweating. A perfect cover for his antics with Melody. His dark thick hair a mess. His face flushed. His suit wrinkled, and one button on his shirt missing where Melody tore it off trying to reach down his pants. Rushing through the door looking like the hounds of hell were chasing him, he asked, "Where's that paper?" "You know the one." "No, I don't," Chris said, confused. He had to take time to catch his breath, then he said, "The New York Post, Chris. The one that mentions Blackstone's name. I told you don't throw that away. It could be gold one day, and today is the day." She sashayed to the file cabinet and pulled out a handful of newspapers and handed him one. "That's it. Get Mr. Blackstone on the phone," Sabastian said. He trudged into his office, pulled off his shirt and pants, and strolled into his bathroom. He needed to wash off Melody's arousing scent. He stood smiling, looking at the water streaming down. The thought of Melody running around in his mind, and how open and free she made love to him, and vice versa. Thinking about her was fine, but he needed to get into the shower before Chris got close and smelled another woman's scent on him. Sabastian didn't like doing this to Chris, but he was a womanizer, and he admitted that. In his mind, that was the first step to being cured. That, and getting married to Chris, would put a stop to his unacceptable behavior, as Chris said to him when she suspected he was fooling around. He had recently met Chris when he lost his job and when he needed a secretary for his detective business. When she came to interview for the job, they clicked with each other, and before the interview was over, they were lying on his leather couch with him inside her, and the help wanted sign removed, and he calling the secretarial agency informing them that he had his girl. That was 6 months ago, and she hasn't disappointed him. He's considering marriage now, but need more time and money to study his options. Sabastian had to admit she was a good fit and a good secretary. He took a short shower and walked out feeling refreshed. Now for a change of clothing. He reached into the closet and pulled out a new suit. Not a suit he had just bought, but one that hadn't been of use to him until now. His suits were backups because he never knew where he would have to go. One for Brooklyn and one for the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He had on his Upper East Side suit when he would sit down to talk to Max. Then he remembered he had forgotten Alex Blackstone's clothes in Melody's apartment.